Hi everyone, it is so good to see you today. You might notice I'm standing in my kitchen. I wanted to tell you our story today from my kitchen. So think about what usually happens in a kitchen. Well, in the morning you eat breakfast, and in the afternoon you eat lunch, and then later in the evening you eat what? Who calls it supper? Raise your hand if you call it supper. Oh, a lot of you do call it supper, so raise your hand if you call it dinner. Oh, a lot of you call it dinner. Well, today's story is called The Last Supper. As you know, we are getting ready and we're approaching Easter. And I wanted to talk to you today about a story that's in our Bible. It comes out of our Bible that happened to Jesus before Easter. It's called The Last Supper. Here we go. So what happens when you are getting ready for supper? Now I brought a little basket of goodies that are going to help me tell today's story. When you're getting ready for supper, you have to get ready, don't you? You have to be prepared. So maybe you set the table. How many of you help sometimes set the table? I bet a lot of you. So maybe you put a placemat down. Then you probably get some silverware and you put that down. And what am I forgetting? You guessed it. We need a plate. Here's my plate. Now you put your plate down. Maybe you have a glass for your drink. And boys and girls, what am I forgetting? What needs to be on here? That's right, you need some food. And maybe somebody prepares the food and you put it on your plate and you eat supper today. Well, in today's story, Jesus is having supper with his friends. Who remembers who his friends are? That's right, it is the disciples. You guys are so smart and you have such good memories. Good job. So Jesus is sitting at a big table with all of his disciples and they're going to eat supper. And all of a sudden, boys and girls, Jesus stands up from his place. And you know what he does? I have some more things in my basket that are going to help me tell the story. He takes off his outer robe, they called it, kind of like maybe a little coat or a robe, takes that off, and he gets a towel. So I brought a fun towel for you to see. Can you see who that is? It's an Aladdin towel. Who's watched the movie Aladdin? Oh, it's such a great movie, isn't it? Jesus didn't have an Aladdin towel. He just had a regular towel. And he took his towel, and it says he wrapped it around his waist. So I'm going to wrap it around my waist. Maybe something like this. Then it says that he had a basin. It probably didn't look anything like this, but that's okay. This is what Miss Melissa had at home, and we're going to pretend is the basin. And then it says that he took some water, boys and girls, and he poured it into the basin. And then you aren't going to believe what he did. He took the basin and he went around to every disciple and he washed their feet, boys and girls. He probably put his basin down on the ground. They put their foot in there and he used his towel to dry it off. Now, I want to tell you something about feet. What are feet? They are stinky, aren't they? And boys and girls, they were especially stinky then because they only wore sandals all the time. So they walked on dirty roads. They didn't have paved roads like us. They were sand and dirt and maybe rocks. And you know what else walked on those same roads? They didn't have cars. And so maybe there were donkeys and horses and cows. And I think you know what I'm saying. There was some icky stuff on that road that they walked on. And it got all on their feet and in their sandals. And boys and girls, their feet were extra dirty. It says that oftentimes when someone came into a house then, a servant would wash their feet before they walked into the house because their feet were so dirty. So imagine Jesus is washing all those stinky feet of the disciples. And the disciples were like, Jesus, why are you washing our feet? You are special. You are the Son of God. You should not be washing our feet. But Jesus said, yes, I want to wash your feet as an example of what a servant does. Boys and girls, Jesus was showing the disciples, just like he showed us when he came into Jerusalem on the donkey, of what it's like to be a servant king, to serve one another. Boys and girls, he told the disciples, just as I have served you by washing your feet, I want you to serve one another. Then, you know what Jesus did after that? He took some bread. It probably didn't look anything like this. But he took some bread, boys and girls, and he broke it. And he passed it around to all the disciples, and he blessed it. And he said, this is my body, which is broken for you. It probably looks something like this picture. He's breaking the bread, and he's saying, this is my body, which is broken for you. And then he took a cup, and he gave thanks for it, and he passed it around to the disciples, and he said, this is my blood, which was shed for the forgiveness of sins. And we know that story about the cross, don't we? Now, boys and girls, we are going to watch the video that tells our story in another way, another fun way for you to try to remember about this story, the Last Supper.
Jesus' disciples went into the city to prepare the Passover meal. When the meal was ready, Jesus and his disciples reclined at the table. Jesus knew his time on earth was almost over, and he would soon return to the Father in heaven. Jesus got up from the table, laid aside his outer robe, and wrapped a towel around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began washing his disciples' feet. In Bible times, a servant would wash someone's feet when he entered a house. Jesus, the King of Kings, was doing what a servant would do. Peter did not want Jesus to wash his feet. "You will never wash my feet, ever," Peter said. Jesus replied, "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." Peter said, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." Jesus told Peter, "The one who is bathed only needs to wash his feet because he is already clean." Jesus wasn't talking about physical cleanliness. He was talking about someone who has been forgiven of his sins by repenting and trusting in Jesus. A Christian should repent when he sins, but he only needs to receive salvation once. When Jesus had washed his disciples' feet and put on his robe, he reclined at the table and said, "Do you understand what I have done? You call me teacher and Lord. I have given you an example to follow. You should wash one another's feet." Jesus was telling the disciples to serve one another. While they were eating, Jesus took the bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples. Jesus said, "Take it and eat it. This is my body." Then he took a cup and gave thanks. He gave it to his disciples and said, "All of you drink from it. This is my blood of the covenant, which is shed for many for the forgiveness of sins." After the supper, Jesus and his disciples sang psalms and went to the Mount of Olives. At the Passover, Jesus shared his last meal with the disciples before his death and resurrection. Jesus said that his death would establish a new covenant. God's people had broken the old covenant, and God promised to make a new covenant to forgive sins. God forgives the sins of those who trust in his Son, Jesus.
I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it makes you think about being a servant to others, just like Jesus was a servant to his disciples. How can you serve someone today? Maybe tomorrow, how can you serve your brothers and sisters and your mom and dad or your neighbors? Now, I want you to be sure to come back tomorrow because we're going to have another really good story about what happens to Jesus on the cross. It's been so great to see you today, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Bye, boys and girls.